Welcome to the Electronics Tools for Beginners video series. I'm going to be doing a video every single day, so make sure you subscribe to make sure you don't miss those. Also be a playlist down in the description and at the end of the video as well to go and watch more of the video series. So make sure you check them out. So in this video we're going to talk about what kinds of components you should have in stock and things that are common you should probably keep around. I've actually gone through and taken some photos of various parts of my lab in here, just showing some of my storage stuff and things that I've got. And I'm just going to go through and just talk about some of these things, and I'll put overlays on showing the photos. Some photos are probably better than others. So some of you have probably seen on the back of my bench here I've got component drawers, which are the ones I most commonly use. Those are just capacitor storage. So in here I've got electrolytic capacitors, some tantalum capacitors, and it's basically radial to the left, axial to the right tantalums are on the bottom row basically of that storage unit. These are the parts I use very often when I'm doing repairs, so that's why they're close to me, right here in front of me. But I've got a lot more storage than this. Electrolytic caps, they're consumable items as far as I'm concerned. They fail. Everyone knows capacitors fail. It's how soon they fail, what kind of life you're going to get out of them, and that kind of stuff. It will vary a lot. And if you're building circuits and designing things, you're going to need electrolytic caps, because you need to, smooth out power supplies and provide filtering and that sort of stuff. You do need to do that. Having capacitors on hand, number one thing. Is another screenshot which I'm going to put over now, which is some of my little SMD component storage boxes. So I've got two different ones here. I've got one which has got basically diodes, transistors, MOSFETs, some sensors, diode bridges, that kind of stuff in it. So there's transistors in there, various different ones, and this is just a convenient storage system because you can fit a lot of transistors in one of those little compartments. It's really convenient because that means you can keep a lot of parts in arm's reach without much messing around. The second box is basically what I use for doing MacBook repair stuff, which I haven't really done a lot of actually in a while. But I've got things in there like tantalum capacitors, surface mount tantalum capacitors and things like that. And some ceramic caps and things like that. Things which are more specific to MacBooks, but they are used for things as well. So that's what's in those two. I've also got a whole bunch of SMD parts which are in these sample books. I've also got other ones around in like bins and stuff like that as well, but sample books is a good thing to have because they're relatively cheap to get and gives you a wide range of components for very little money. You can go to places like AliExpress and buy these sample books. I mean, quality could be questionable, don't know. If you're worried about that, you can always get a sample book from AliExpress and replace the parts with ones from a good source that you trust. But I tend to use the AliExpress ones. They've been fine, I haven't really had any issues, so I've had no reason to suspect anything. But you never quite know what you're going to be getting. So those sample books, you can get resistors, capacitors, inductors, diodes, all sorts of things, all different kinds of parts. I'll put some links down below as well for these things, for various items I'm discussing here as well. So you can actually have hundreds of different values in a book. You might get, I don't know, maybe 50 components of a particular value or something. I'm not quite sure. It depends on the parts really, but you're going to get a selection of them, and they're really convenient for doing design or minor repairs, stuff like that. Having those things on hand is really convenient. Highly recommend them, and they're cheap, really. So another thing I'm going to put an overlay on now is my resistors. So I mentioned SMD resistors, SMD capacitors. I've also got through-hole stuff because through-holes, a lot of the things that I do is through-hole componentry. So I've got parts drawers full of resistors, which are through-hole, and capacitors, and I've got Zener diodes in there as well, fuses, this is in that section as well, common fuses. So I've basically got, I think, just about every resistor value there is. There's lots of them there, and capacitors are common capacitors. So things I've needed to buy in the past, I've allocated them to a drawer, and then that drawer stays in existence. I don't take that drawer away again once I've used them. I keep that drawer in place and keep it stocked. So those are things you need to do. It depends on what you're looking at targeting. If you're looking at SMD stuff or through-hole stuff. If you're not worried about through-hole because that's old technology, and you're only worried about surface mount stuff, it gets a lot easier because you can use sample books. And if you're going to be a lot of particular values, say if you're going to do a lot of design, you're going to be using, say, 100 nanofarad caps, lots of those, buy them in a roll. Buy a whole spool of them. You'll use them all eventually. I've also got spools as well. I've got some bins with spools in my other lab there, so I'm not sure what's in it to be honest, but I've got loads of stuff. So you have to sort of think about what kind of things are you doing. You're going to be doing only SMD, you're going to be doing only a through-hole, a mixture of both, then you need to sort of have a stock of both kinds of parts for doing that sort of thing. Another thing I've got, which is another overlay I'm going to put up now, is my semiconductor parts drawers. So I've got a few sets of drawers, and in those I've got loads of ICs. Now, because these are mostly through-hole parts, These are sorts of things that I deal with, mostly through-hole, the repairs I'm doing. So I've got a big stock of through-hole components. I do have SMD parts in there as well. I do have some mixed in there. I also got a bin full of SMD ICs, literally a big storage bin, and they're all in there, stuffed in. Get a lot of ICs in those bins. So I keep in stock of all those kinds of common parts as well. Like I've got 4000 series and 74 series type ICs in there. As you know, the common parts I've got basically, well, most of them I think. I've got a lot of them there. Whenever I had to buy some of those parts to do a repair, or I see them in an item which I'm fixing, I'll buy a bunch of them, stick them in parts, because I can get them now. In 10 years, can I still get them? I don't know, maybe not. So I always do that sort of thing. I've also got lots of other common parts in there as well, you know, various op amps, and I've got buck regulators, or buck converters, boost converters, voltage regulators, read switches, read relays. I've even got some overflow in there for some other kinds of microcontroller kind of parts. I've got like micro SD cards and things like that in there as well. So things which can be commonly used. If you're doing microcontroller stuff, then you also want to have microcontrollers. So you probably want to have a stock of a certain board you'd use. Personally, I use things like the Arduino Pro Mini. That's a nice little board which I use for things. It's quite small, compact. I've also got the ESP32 Defkit V1. So those are the two like basic microcontroller things that I use. So if I'm designing some kind of circuit, I use basically one or the other of those. So if it doesn't need Wi-Fi or doesn't need much power, I'd use the Arduino Pro Mini. If I need a bit more power or need Wi-Fi, then I'm going to be using the ESP32. And I'll base it on one of those two microcontrollers, and I'm building these circuits and these things I'm designing. You know, it's so nice to have something which you just go to. Like you know that part inside out, you know how it works. You've got a layout, like a footprint for making circuit boards out of it. You've got all the supporting code for it and that sort of stuff. Keep a stock of them. Like the Arduino Pro Minis, I think I've got about 40 of them sitting around in a box. ESP32s, I'll probably got about 50 of those. It's just what you need to do. Once you find something, get a load of them. So some other things I have is like LEDs, common LEDs, and like single standalone LEDs, different sizes, LED mounts for mounting on project boxes, switches, toggle switches, press switches, momentary press button switches for mounting on circuit boards, a selection of things. You can buy these assortment kits from AliExpress and places like that, and you have a selection of different switches, you know, press buttons and stuff like that. You can actually buy these assortments, and they're really convenient to have, especially if you don't plan on like using a lot of a particular type. You may just want a selection, so you can choose one which is going to suit your application when you're designing something, or if you're repairing something, you might be able to find something which actually suits. Plugs and sockets, kinds of common things like that. There's just so many things you could possibly need. My recommendations, whenever you come across something you need, buy 10 times more than you think you need. You always get a stock. Always. At the very least, buy twice as much as you think you need. At the very least. So if you think you need 2, get 4. Because there's a good chance that if something doesn't go right, something goes wrong, or you've got a circuit design wrong, or you blow up a part, you don't have to wait because you can order them again, because you've blown up all the ones you've got. At least then you've got some spares. Always pays to have spares. Trust me on this. And if you're doing microcontroller stuff, get some displays. Get a different selection of displays and things like that. So visual devices. So if you're using a microcontroller, you can hook up a display to it, be it a SPI or I2C or whatever. Get some displays. It's going to be parallel port, doesn't matter. Just figure out what you're going to use. I have OLEDs, LCDs, TFTs, lots of different sizes, and you'd be amazed at how often I'll just think, oh, I think I'll pull one of those displays out, hook this up. Oh look, that finishes the project off nicely. And you don't have to wait for things to come into stock. You have to order them or wait for them coming from overseas, or hopefully there's no chip shortage on your particular display that you want to use. If you've got a small selection of displays, it makes it really convenient if you're not trying to develop a project. You can always put on a display temporarily and then change the display again later on when you want to actually upgrade the display to a final revision or whatever. It's just handy to have those kinds of things on hand. That's why it's handy. Another really common part which you find using a lot is things like header pins. 0.1-inch header pins, or 2.54mm, whatever you want to use. You know, header pins and female headers, male and female headers. You know, both single row, dual row, that sort of stuff. They get used quite a lot, and lots of different things. Get some stock. Get some females and males which you can use. Just get the long ones, and then you can cut them down to the length you need. It's just easy that way, rather than getting specific lengths and think, oh, I can't, you know, that's 1 pin short or something. Just get the 40 pin versions and cut them down to the length you need. But use a lot of those. And if you're doing a lot of through-hole stuff, or any through-hole stuff, get some IC sockets. Definitely get IC sockets. They're really cheap to get. You don't need these round pin machined ones. I mean, they're nice to have. They are supposed to be slightly better, but I've always used the cheap ones. They've always worked fine for me. I've never had any issues with them. Keep a stock of those. Just get a range of sizes of IC sockets from say 8 pin through to say 24 pin or something like that, and some like narrow and wide footprint ones. So then when you do get a situation where you're trying to do something that don't work, and you're trying to use say a bit of perf board even, and you put in your IC and you're trying to do testing, don't solder your IC straight into the circuit board, put in a socket, and then if you blow your IC up, you can unplug it, plug a new one in, carry on testing. Much easier. So I think I've waffled on enough about that now. So don't forget to check out the playlist just here. There's a playlist there YouTube thinks you should watch there. There's a subscribe link right here, so click on that if you're not already subscribed. And over here's a Patreon support link if you want to help support the channel and donate a small amount of money per month to help me to make content. So, bye. I'll see you tomorrow.